Beneath our radiant Southern Cross. Assignment number 2 for EDC1200 Self-Education and Society by Kirsten Noe. How might education mediate difference and dominance? The Southern Cross, used by Indigenous Australians for thousands of years as a guiding light, nature's compass. The Southern Cross, part of our heritage, our national identity, as embodied in our Australian flag. The Southern Cross, could it be a symbol of racism? In an interview for Australian Associated Press, nominee for 2010 Australian of the Year, filmmaker Warwick Thornton warns us against using the constellation as a racist emblem. Thornton pleads to the people of Australia not to turn the Southern Cross into a swastika. In the lead up to White Australia's Day of National Pride, Australia Day, Thornton asks us to remember the true meaning and symbolism of the stars. He tells us that we need to think about our use of the Southern Cross on Australia Day and why it could be used as a racist emblem. I would go further and suggest that not only the Southern Cross, but the entire Australian flag is in danger. Furthermore, I believe that undercurrents of racism are growing stronger each Australia Day. Walk into any major store and you will find a plethora of Australia Day merchandise on sale. From t-shirts, stubby coolers, beach chairs, even inflatable pools. Stores are making a killing. Here, check out my new tats. In recent years, it seems to be becoming almost mandatory to drape yourself in the Australian flag or Southern Cross in some shape or form, and with that is an increasing push by white Australia to declare and prove yourself to be Australian. Never mind that the Southern Cross is actually viewable from several countries, or that it is used in several flags, including those of Papua New Guinea and New Zealand. We ascribe to it as purely Australian. So in declaring yourself to be 100% Aussie, think about your social cues this Australia Day. You should really either throw or attend a barbie. Make sure you join yourself in the Australian flag, and don't forget the beer. Now if you're a Queenslander, that has to be Florets. Have a game of backyard cricket, and if Sam Kekovich gets his way, you'll also throw a bit of lamb on the grill. You could even have your barbecue camping, but whatever you do, make sure you sit down, guzzle beer with your mates, and bitch about the Abos, the Wogs, the Lebos, the boat people, or whoever else you deem to be un-Australian. And don't forget to chuck a sickie the next day while you recover from your hangover. So I agree with Warwick Thornton. The Southern Cross is in real jeopardy of turning into a swastika. And as we plaster ourselves with this emblem on Australia Day, or indeed any other day, we continue to lose its meaning as we lose the meaning of Australia Day. Do we really want to turn the Southern Cross into a swastika? Do we really want to be renowned for our meat-eating, beer-guzzling and cricket/footy ability? Or do we need to rediscover the true meaning of the Southern Cross, of Australia Day, and of that backyard barbecue? So how can we fix this? Education is the key. The ideas I'm drawing from this issue are primarily along the axis of race. My objectives are to open students' eyes to racism occurring around them, to have them understand how it feels to be considered non-white or non-Australian, and to give them the tools to stand up and say, this is not acceptable to me. For this purpose, I'm aiming my educational ideas at secondary students. I'm doing this because I believe this is where we can affect the greatest level of change. These kids are about to enter the adult world, the real world. Let's equip them for this. I have 3 main goals I want to achieve. I want them to be critical thinkers and not to take things on face value. I want them to be able to understand and appreciate difference. And finally, I want them to be strong enough in their opinions to stand up and voice them. How might education mediate difference and dominance? Here, let me throw some ideas at you. Let's begin by giving them a little homework, shall we? For 1 week, get the students to list as many places as they can which display either the Southern Cross or the Australian flag in some form. Tell them to look out for things like tattoos, bumper stickers, clothing, etc., and they'll need to write down the context it was in as well. To make things a little more interesting, and perhaps to motivate them to find as many as they can, We can offer prizes for the most sightings and the most unusual sighting. After a week, we can collate the results in the classroom and analyse them together. This will involve a lot of discussion. We could perhaps have 3 columns, one for no racism, one for underlying racism, and one for blatant racism. Through discussion, I can help them think critically about our national emblems. Next, let's get them to ask some questions. We can get them to think about the meaning of the Southern Cross, the Australian flag, and Australia Day. This would particularly suit being taught when school goes back in January, with Australia Day fresh in people's minds. Give them the task to find 3 people they know, only one of whom can be a family member, and they need to interview them. The questions they need to ask are what the person's ideas are on the meaning of the Southern Cross, the Australian flag, and Australia Day. Once again, the results of the interviews need to be collated in class together and analysed. I would imagine that we would get some pretty interesting replies and discussion points. Along the axis of race, particularly in Australia, there is a great deal of feeling around where we have originated from. Are you 100% Aussie? Yet we all originated from somewhere else, somewhere along the line. So let's see how far we can go back. Let's get the students to do a family tree, complete with the countries of birth for their relatives and ancestors. We can discuss the family trees and how it doesn't make us any better or worse, just different. We can also talk about some of the scientific theories of evolution here and the concept that perhaps we may have come from the same race, once upon a time. And while we discuss family trees and migration, we can also use this to look into citizenship, discuss what it means to become a citizen, and look at whether we can answer the citizenship questions ourselves. Perhaps we can even create our own citizenship test based on what values we think Australians should hold. As a pre-service educator, I'm working to understand the perspectives of others. This is difficult because I am part of white privileged Australia. So in considering how I can provide better education, I think I need to stick my hand up and ask for some help. I can talk about Indigenous Australians and what the world is like for them, but I don't really know. I can talk about immigrants and refugees and what the world is like for them, but I don't really know. So instead, perhaps I can approach the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, find a community group of some sort, and ask someone to come and share their story. Likewise with immigrants or refugees. Imagine having a classroom where the kids can listen to the narratives of these people and to gain an understanding of where they've come from and why they've moved to Australia, of their struggles, their hardships and joys. I think these types of guest speakers could be really powerful. Teaching against racism might be working really well for me in the classroom, but what happens when these teenagers hit the real world and that typical Aussie barbecue, or when they see a mate in that horrific t-shirt? To combat this, I'd like to do a series of role plays where they are put in situations where they see racism occurring. For instance, they hear someone speak about immigrants in a really derogatory manner, or an awful joke about an Aboriginal. I want to prepare them for these social situations by role-playing and coming up with some strategies for being strong and standing up for their opinions, without losing mates. Perhaps even using the right words, they might be able to influence others, but they need to be comfortable doing so. Again, sharing and discussion within the class can be very beneficial for this. Coming up with these ideas has been exciting for me. I can't wait to get into a classroom. And imagine the potential we could realise if we all shared these ideas in the staff room. Instead of waiting for change, we could create it.